their philosophy is far more automated. What's important for us is that we create the opportunities ourselves from the UK to make ourselves more competitive.
What's the danger for us as a nation and as the 8th? We could progress to be the 7th, the 6th, the 5th. We must have some leverage over all of this to be able to manufacture it too.
And if the UK isn't competitive, if an automotive company is told or encouraged to invest, say, 50% into the UK, and they say, well, you're too expensive, we need to look at why.
Lee, welcome to an MTD podcast. We've got something different in store today for our audience. In fact, this is something that we've collectively wanted to do for a little while, and that's talk about UK manufacturing, talk about the some of the good things that are happening, some of the positive stories that we're reading on the MTDCNC channel and amongst other places recently. But maybe dig into the detail a little and talk about what this actually means for manufacturing, what actually is manufactured, and whether there's anything we think, and probably more yourself with your experience, as to what we could do better as a nation. So fasten your seatbelts, because this is going to be really interesting. Some of the topics that we're going to discuss here today should really start, Lee, with perhaps yourself, and give us a little bit of an overview of I'm not going to say how you qualify to be sitting there to talk about UK manufacturing, but your experience that leads you to want to talk about what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, well firstly, the objectives are to continue with a very positive vibe, but I think it's to challenge some of this and get some responses as to whether we're right or wrong, but to look at the impact that the industry OEMs could have, and more importantly the government could have, on creating more opportunity for manufactured product in the UK, and maybe use strategies like we see in aerospace, offset strategies, where there's almost a forcefulness or a push or pull to bring business to the UK as an obligation, and also to make us more competitive, and to bring more long-term contracts so we can purchase relevant equipment to make us more competitive.
Now, you personally have been in this business, not Starrag's business, but in the industry for about 30 years, haven't you? So you must have seen loads of changes. You are, and I mentioned about being qualified to talk about this stuff, but there's a lot of people, I would say, a lot of noise on social media from some that really probably aren't quite as qualified as somebody like yourself. And I mean that in a very positive way, Lee. I mean, your experience within manufacturing, just tell us a little bit about your journey over that 30-year period.
Well, I'm going to correct you there, because it's just coming up to 40 years.
40, you don't look old enough.
40 years, yeah. So my background has always been in the manufacturing sector, the engineering manufacturing sector, in terms of subtractive processes, so cutting processes. And it's varied between different industries. It's varied between lots of different materials, so plastics and composites through to soft and hard metals. Always subtractive, always high-end, productive, and latterly using a lot of automation processes. So it's all about producing lowest cost per part. And what I've seen in recent years is far more advanced solutions, often going into other countries around the world, and where we've delivered some really great success stories in the UK. There could be more. There aren't enough of them because we don't win that kind of business in the UK.
Now, you're currently sales director for the Starrag, or for Starrag here in the UK. We're not going to talk in detail really today about some of the products that they supply, because we've done that a lot, and a lot of people will know, the machinery and the equipment that you supply and where you supply it into. My point being from this statement is that the aerospace sector, the automotive sectors, some of these areas you're involved in now, you have been involved in for that, not 30, but almost 40 years. So you've seen some changes, and you were saying to me earlier about, very early on in your career that one of your colleagues was telling you about how we were the second largest manufacturer of aerospace components in the world, which I think we probably still are, but there was some significant differences, wasn't there, to then to now?
Well, I think if I go back to my younger days, if you like, even when I was in manufacturing, I was also out visiting companies on behalf of that manufacturer. Since then, I've been in a selling capacity for probably almost 3 decades. And I've visited lots and lots of companies around the UK. And if you go back 30 years, there was a supplier of components to the aerospace and automotive and other industries on every industrial estate. Lots and lots of very high-end small companies. You don't see that so much these days. You tend to see larger groups where companies have come together, if you like, being the supply chain, and far fewer of them today. So a lot of the work I used to see 20, 30 years ago went offshore. Some of it's back, but a lot of it's still offshore.
Well, let's explore that, because this is the points for discussion today, and we're going to start with almost outlining where we are as a nation within manufacturing, because we'll put this graph over the screen, in fact, for people to see that are watching it. And if you're not watching it and you're listening, we'll obviously talk through it. But at the end of 2023, the manufacturing sector accounted for 9.3% of total UK economic output. Now, when we look at that number is, would you say that that's good? That's not so good? Could be better? And how is that broken down in your mind?
Well, I think it's great, but it could be better, of course. So there's 32 million people working in the UK, and there's 15% in the engineering sector. And these are the kind of great news story stats that we see. There's around 2.6 million in manufacturing jobs within that sector. But that sector encompasses, when we talk about manufacturing, we're talking about mining, electricity, waste management, oil and gas, all sorts of different divisions within that overall sector. And we're working in an even more niche part, precision machining, within that sector. So it's great news. It's a good percentage of the overall wealth, if you like.
But it's not as good as, if I compare, like Germany, for example, 26.6% of their gross value added is manufacturing. That's over a quarter of their output. That's significantly higher than here, isn't it? That's a big difference. It's a big difference,
and this is where I was kind of alluding to when I said, 30 years ago there was a good machine shop on every street corner, and now there isn't. They've managed to maintain that over there, as have lots of other regions, whereas we've let that precision engineering manufacturing sector slip away. So we're very good at assembling things, but we're buying a lot of product in from offshore that could be made onshore.
I've got a figure here as well. In 2022, we talk about manufacturing, and I mentioned the figure of 224 billion, but 6.8 billion is precision engineering. So it just shows how big, and you mentioned a few of the areas of manufacturing that we're not involved in, but it just shows what makes up that number is a lot of different kind of, call them sectors, call them industries, whatever you choose to.
It does. So when we say we're doing extremely well in manufacturing, yes, we are, but it's coming from different parts of manufacturing. If we look specifically at our subsector within manufacturing, which, as you said, precision machining, it's a very small part of that.
And there's an interesting graph here. It's the one I mentioned about how the graph below, or the graph we put on the screen, is taken from a web page that shows the manufacturing output at the end of 2023 at the same level as 2008, albeit the landscape has risen and fallen 15% during this time, with the biggest fluctuations in 2021. So what we're seeing here is kind of lots of ups and downs, but a maintained level of output almost.
I was quite surprised when I saw this graph when we started looking into this, and I expected to see, as you would see if you were looking at stocks and shares, a a landscape, but a
gradual,
rising
yeah.
landscape, if you like. This has remained, it's remained horizontal since 2007. So, yeah, this is an indicator that we've got some great success stories, but really we haven't grown since 2008.
And this is, it's important to state that these figures are actually coming from the UK Parliament website, so these are clearly, you'd like to think are
well, they are
correct.
legitimate numbers, but so great news. But I think there's a real opportunity here to change.
Now, we're the eighth largest manufacturer in the world, which again you probably would have seen across the MTDCNC channel be promoted. Either I think it was earlier in this year or last year, in fact, which again is good news because we're accelerating our way up the top 10, should we say? But we're the sixth largest economy in the world in general. So we're not as big within manufacturing as we potentially should be when you take into account that we are the sixth in the world as an economy.
No, and we are announcing some great success stories, as you talked about earlier, and I'm sure we'll go on to a little bit later in this discussion. But to me, those predominantly are assembly-type success stories. It's very difficult to get the information from the OEMs as to the proportion of those assembled products that are manufactured in the UK. And there was an article on LinkedIn by a train supplier up north the other week, and it was a great success story. And I challenged it, and I just said, look, it's a great story, but how many of these parts are made in the UK? Nobody responded, of course. We need to know this, and we need to have a proportion of all of those assembled goods to be made here.
So is one of the major points that we're discussing here, and one of the major things that's clearly in your mind and probably your colleagues, is the fact that we do read and as I say, I wouldn't take anything away from these stories because they're brilliant. You know, they create jobs. And for our economy to continue to accelerate up this top 10 of largest manufacturers, we need a lot of this. I mean, we've heard recently that Aston Martin is creating more than 400 new jobs at its Gaydon and St Albans plants to support the production of its next generation of sports cars. That's brilliant. We've got the Ford Motor Company open a new £24 million facility at its UK headquarters in Essex, delivering Ford's European electric vehicle plans. I mean, there is loads here to talk about, and a lot of these stories you will find across the MTDCNC social media pages, which again I can't emphasise enough is really good to read. But what I'm taking from this conversation is we're trying to understand within all this how much of this or these, call them projects, how much of these parts are actually machined and made here, and if not, why, and if not, how can they be?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples that aren't automotive. If you look at the energy sector, one of the big successes in the energy sector, and one of the big drivers that the government are pushing to this net zero objective is wind energy. So I fly a lot, you fly a lot, and we as we fly over the east coast, all you see on a clear day is wind farms in the sea. We have a company in China. Starrag has a company in China that manufactures components for the wind industry to support the Chinese market, and they've just installed their 100th large machine for that industry, making components for their region. In the UK, we make nothing for this region. We make the big blades, which is a fantastic success story for the northeast, and they make the blades, they put them on a ship, they sail them out, and they assemble them. Of course they would. Where else would you make them? But the bearings, the hubs, the drive systems, the gearboxes where there's gearboxes or direct drive systems, all of those components and sub-assemblies are made elsewhere and they're shipped in. So the first thing we did at Hinkley Point when we built the...
And where are they? Where are these parts? Where are the parts made?
They're made in Europe.
Right.
They're made in...
And is there any reason we couldn't do them here?
No, not at all. So my point on this is if the UK is purchasing this value and this quantity of product, then the UK should be manufacturing a share of that product. And that has to be driven from top down. So wind energy, whether it's nuclear. There's a whole new nuclear industry opportunity ahead of us, especially with small modular reactors and the drive away from fossil fuels. The automotive industry is expanding rapidly, as you've just said. The aerospace is expanding rapidly as well. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of components, raw material, machine components, additive components that could be produced in the UK.
So let's try and think of how, in your mind, there's clearly solutions to that, which would appear to be maybe simpler or quite simple to implement, wouldn't there?
Well, I think it's...
I mean, if we need these and we're buying these, we must have some leverage over all of this to be able to manufacture it too.
We're fantastic engineers in the UK. We're very, very highly skilled. We're exceptional at developing processes and prototyping processes and making small batches of high value, high complexity components. What we don't appear to be very good at is winning the long-term production parts, if you like. So we get the business for the quick turnaround, low volume stuff. Some other region gets the 10-year, 20-year contract to produce the parts. 20, 30 years ago, we all said, that's all right because it's going to a low-cost economy. It's the cost of labour. It's not. It's not that at all. It's the fact that they've invested in the right equipment to make those parts in volume at the right prices. And to me, we don't have sufficient emphasis from government and from the OEMs to ensure that business is made in the UK.
I mean, what about something like, the aerospace sector as well? It was an 80 billion for here in the UK in 2022, which was considerably more than Germany and France. Now, that would say to me that we're clearly doing something right. But again, how would that be made up, do you think? Or what would that comprise of?
Well, the aerospace is a fantastic sector for the UK, and we've got OEMs based here that are manufacturing large civil aerospace structures. The military is a big market. The aero engine is a big market. Again, there's lots of assembly here. There's some great manufacture of components here, but there isn't enough great manufacture of components here. And a lot of that business went offshore 20 years ago. Again, for the reasons I said earlier, that there was this driver for low cost. Nowadays, with equipment and technology, there is no reason why the UK can't compete with any other country. Simple.
Yeah.
But the only way that UK companies can invest is by having a long enough term commitment or contract to be able to invest against, and that's what we need.
I want to mention as well that the Tata Group's 4 billion manufacturing plant, which is expected to create 4,000 direct jobs and thousands more across the supply chain, which is the 620-acre Gravity Smart campus in Bridgewater in Somerset. Now, you know what this is for, and what's the importance of that, and where does that position us?
It's hugely important. It's a fantastic success. It's a fantastic success story. Let's not take that away.
What are they going to be doing there?
I believe they're going to be making batteries there. I don't know exactly the process, but what I do know is we don't have that capability in the UK today, and we need it, and we're far behind other regions. So it's absolutely imperative that we do this in the UK. It's a great story, but it doesn't give us an advantage over other regions. We're just catching up with other regions. Okay,
and then when you look at companies like JLR, 250 new jobs in the West Midlands to support electrification, test batteries and electric drive units, there seems to be a common theme here with electric vehicles, doesn't there? And do you think that that's across the board, that we're kind of playing catch up really in this area rather than setting the benchmark?
Difficult one. I think probably yes, because electric vehicles is not new now, and electric vehicles is again part of the net zero directives from government, and 2030, 2035, whatever the date is now, when combustion vehicles won't be able to be purchased, everything's going electric. So We must be part of that. We can't allow other countries to produce electric vehicles and us not. So it's an obvious journey. It's an obvious journey for our industry to be on. But how many of those manufactured components are we making here?
Well, that's a question as well for if you're listening or watching this. I mean, this is a debate in a sense, and we want other people to contribute because, we can read and hear so much, but there'll be other, I'm sure, more qualified people that are listening or watching to this that may be able to contribute and answer some of the questions that you were saying, Lee, because I agree. It's, how many of these components within these assemblies will actually be machined here? And how important is it for them to be machined here? I mean,
for the OEM, it's not really important at all. As long as they're the right price and they're delivered and they're assembled, great, their job's done. What's important for us is that we create the opportunities ourselves from the UK to make ourselves more competitive.
And what's the danger? What's the danger for us as a nation and as the eighth? We could progress to be the seventh, the sixth, the fifth, the largest manufacturer in the world. We would claim that that's brilliant news, and I'm sure it would be. I know we're very unlikely to get to those dizzy heights, but if we were to still not be making any of those components here, would that be a bad thing?
Well, we should be pleased that we're now eighth, but we should immediately be aspiring to be seventh and then sixth. We shouldn't just say, great, we're eighth. And I think we should look now at what can we do more of. What are we good at? What could we be better at?
Well, we could probably climb from 8th to 7th to 6th to 5th quite quickly by, if you split the two and you talk about assembly and actually or machining or the making of the parts, and introduce that into the equation, that leap may be had potentially.
Sure. Well, if you look at imports, I had a quick look at imports on the internet. It's difficult to get credible information. But I did find a chart for the 10 biggest importing industries, and second and fifth are motor vehicles and aircraft, respectively. So exactly what those products are, I don't know, but we're importing an awful lot of products into our factories in the UK to then assemble them into working units, whether they're aero engines, whether they're sub-assemblies, whether they're full assemblies. So we're talking tens of billions in each of those sectors there.
Yeah. I mean, you've only got to look at Germany. Again, 506 billion is their automotive output in 2022, and ours was 13.3 billion. I mean, that's just... but we all know that they are a powerhouse in that industry.
So why are they a powerhouse and we're not?
You tell me.
Well, I can't tell you. What we've got to do is we've got to aspire to be the same. Yeah. We've got to aspire to be the same or better than a region like that within our precision manufacturing sector. Why should we be a lower percentage than them? And
would you hazard a guess that when you look at Germany, and again, if there are people listening or watching this, please feel free to get in touch, because we talk about importing and assembling. Germany, I guess, would machine and make and assemble a lot more than we do. Would you feel that from the people, from your travels?
Sure. When I look at what we do as a business in other global regions, their philosophy is far more automated than ours in the UK. Far more automated. So when we look at the manufacturing machining sector in the UK, there's a lot of good equipment out there, but there's a lot of single pallet vertical type machines with a very highly skilled person operating it, doing a prototyping type job.
And you see less of that?
See less of that out there because they've got banks of machines that are automated because they've won the contract for the next 10, 15 years at a piece part price on a production machine. And if we're going to win that kind of work in the UK to supply the industries we talked about earlier, we have to have the right equipment.
So I'm guessing what I hear a lot and people say is that we blame the small to medium-sized business for not investing in technology and automation and the things that you're talking about. But in turn, we probably shouldn't be blaming them. We should probably be blaming somebody else.
It goes to the top of the tree. The subcontract market supplying those companies has to have security. It has to have long-term commitment in order to invest in those kind of automated systems. And And because it doesn't, it has to go for a lower cost option, which is generally a lower productivity option, which is a higher piece part price. So if we're to be successful in that more volume market, then there has to be a change of strategy.
So it's an excuse to say, well, actually, it's cheaper to get it made somewhere else.
Yeah, I suppose it is an excuse. I mean, there is a directive now, and I really like this word, reshoring. So there's a Reshoring UK organisation, which is a group of trade associations that are trying to help companies get accredited and come together with like-minded companies and cluster and win business. But this just helps them get in front of somebody. It doesn't actually help them win anything, and without the right equipment and without the right commitments, they won't win.
In the first place.
I'd say they're unlikely to win.
Yeah, so it sounds like a great initiative, but the what's behind it ultimately isn't gonna solve the problem potentially.
It's not. And I read an article this week on the internet. It was from the manufacturer, and it was there's a paper coming out very shortly by the Cambridge University Innovation Policy, and they've really focused. The report for 2024 is focused on machinery and equipment. And this is written for professionals, academics and policymakers, with an emphasis on the policymakers. Now, policymakers are the people at the top of the tree in my eye. And this is a focus on competitiveness and productivity for the UK. And it talks about sustainability and net zero. But in order for us to be competitive and productive, we have to go about things the right way, which is a different way to the way we do things today.
Yeah, there's an order with which you obviously have to follow, and you're only as good as your weakest link, call it. So,
well, we're very good at putting procedures in place. There's a directive that the Nuclear AMRC have been working with for a number of years now, called Fit for Nuclear, and they're going around and they're, I suppose you could say, they're auditing companies within the UK and accrediting them as being fit for nuclear. So they've got the capability to win this, to do this work. But first, they've got to win the work, and to win the work, they've got to be competitive. And do they have the equipment?
So you can't
today?
become fit for nuclear until you've won the work. Is that what we're saying?
No, you can become fit for nuclear, which means you've got to tick in the box to say, yeah, this is a good company. They've got the right procedures in place. They've got the right management systems in place, etc. It doesn't mean they've got the relevant equipment in place to be able to win the work. And they won't win the work when there's an existing supply chain elsewhere around the world, unless they're going to be competitive and convincing that it's worth moving the work to them. So it's a kind of uphill battle. Now, the only way that we can really encourage people to come to the UK is, like I said earlier, if the government or somebody very high up the food chain forces the fact that a high proportion of the business has to come to the UK.
Let's pick up on that in a few minutes, because I want to ask you about the AMRC and Catapult, and I want to find out a little bit more for our listeners as to how these organisations operate, their funding, and what they give to UK industry and how important they are.
Well, I think they're very important. And in Germany, you talked about Germany earlier, they have what they call the Fraunhofer, which is the bridge, if you like, between university and industry. And the AMRC and the Catapult is exactly the same. So it's to take technology and bring it up to a readiness level where industry can adopt it and use it in a way that it offers a benefit, whether that's a commercial benefit, a quality benefit, or whatever. So they develop and introduce processes that help companies save money. But the bulk of the companies they work with are the OEM type companies. They do some work with SMEs as well. But again, it doesn't mean those companies are going to win more business. They've got to go out and be commercially attractive.
And how would they be funded?
Well, that money comes from partly from the government and partly from members and partly from paid-for projects. So there's different ways that they get their money.
And that applies to all the catapults?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Have you got an example of maybe a project within that you've been involved in or you've seen success, which has then rubber stamped our abilities as a UK manufacturer?
A lot of what we do with them is tied up under NDA, so there's very little specific we can talk about. But we've worked on projects with them where significant process changes have been made that have brought cycle times down exponentially in the right direction, and that's resulted in justification for higher value, higher productivity equipment that's been introduced in the UK, ultimately making lower cost components.
Okay, so that was going to be my question. Has that solution then been implemented in the UK or been shipped overseas to be implemented somewhere else?
Well, that's a good question. I think a bit of both. But the catapult centres are there to help UK companies. That's their job. And yes, they've done, together with us, projects that have helped UK companies.
Okay, now as part of our vote in 2016, we were asked whether we wanted to, should we stay or should we go, as they say. We voted to leave the EU. It should have been an opportunity and was presented as an opportunity. Do you think that's happened?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to be political on this one. No, I don't think it has. My expectation from a business point of view was that UK becoming more independent would open more doors, and we'd see a tidal wave of business opportunity for the manufacturing sector. I don't think we've seen that. I've not really seen much of a difference since pre-Brexit in terms of the way the companies I'm dealing with are operating with and the opportunities that they're faced with. So I don't think it's made us a significantly more attractive place to trade with. I think we have to change the way we behave within the UK and the way we buy equipment to make us more competitive.
Which really rolls into everything that we're discussing, doesn't it? I mean, it's a bit of a contentious issue, but I think I agree with you. I don't think I've seen anything significant that's improved. I don't import products, so I can't speak for that side of things, but I have heard people say that there's been challenges in that area. Let's then talk about some of the things that they have presented themselves over the course of the last half an hour or so, but things that you think that potentially other nations or other countries do, or examples you've seen, because there's one we'll talk about specifically where trade agreements and or where agreements between two parties do heavily influence the success of a manufacturing nation.
Well, I think I mentioned earlier about offset when we first started talking. Offset's something I saw 30, 40 years ago, something that was bandied around in aerospace a lot, and it was a reciprocal trade agreement between countries, and the famous one for me was with Boeing. So Boeing have an offset policy with the UK, and it's something that they set up with the supply chain back in 2015, and they've spent over 12.8 billion since then with the UK, and they also have a prosperity agreement, which is something they set up with the UK government 2016, and that delivers significant economic benefit to the UK. It's focused on supply chain export skills, sustainability, capability, and innovation. I'm only using this as an example because there are others, but this is a great example of a reciprocal trade agreement. So we spend money with the US, with Boeing, and they reciprocate with a value of business for the UK. If we did this with everything, if we did this with the wind energy market, if we did this with the nuclear market, especially with the forthcoming SMRs, if we did this with the automotive market and other parts of the aerospace market, and we were, for example, given 60-70% of the value of those contracts in work for UK, that would mean a number of different things for a number of different parts of the sector, but for sure it would mean that a much higher proportion of components would have to be made in the UK. So that would mean the supply of raw material, So for the castings and the forging industry, the raw material suppliers, it would mean a lot for the machining companies out there, the metrology companies out there. And those components then would be able to be delivered within a couple of hours from the component manufacturer into the assembly manufacturer, thus hitting the CO2 footprint targets that the government are now.
I mean, how did we go about setting something up like that with Boeing? And why is that? Or is it more readily used? I don't suppose it can be, because we probably wouldn't be having this conversation in such detail at the moment, or we probably wouldn't be talking about some of the things we're talking about if it was rolled out, like you said, across other partnerships. That must be quite a close alliance then.
It must be, and I've no idea how this was set up. I just see this as a really exciting model that could be rolled out across lots of different sectors. I'm not in a position to influence this, that this has to come from government as a directive. Part of the industrial strategy ought to have this as a key topic, and with fixed targets and objectives. And if the UK isn't competitive, if an automotive company is told or encouraged to invest, say, 50% into the UK, and they say, well, you're too expensive, we need to look at why. And if it's because we have the wrong plant and equipment, what does it take to get the right plant and equipment? Over what time does that plant and equipment need to be paid off? And can those companies give long enough term commitments to enable investments to be made that give the relevant benefits to the UK, be commercially sensible, and there's a win-win for both sides?
I always think, I did hear on my travels about how different countries implement systems and schemes like we're talking about, and one of which someone was telling me about Australia, albeit it's not a very big manufacturing nation. In fact, it's about 5% of their GDP in Australia, which is half of what ours is. But for a nation that really doesn't do a lot of, you wouldn't have thought does a lot of manufacturing, they have a scheme where there's some offset within the government that 40% of the parts have to be made in Australia, which of course encourages employment for people. It trains people up, doesn't it? And these are all the knock-on benefits of keeping the work here.
It is. I mean, the UK is a key manufacturing nation, always has been. Look at the Formula One racing industry. We are innovative, fast-moving, creative engineers in the UK, and we led the industrial revolution.
But that kind of falls into a lot of what you're talking about. I mean, the demands on those companies that are making those parts are for high-value parts, critical parts, turned around very quickly, designed, all of the sort of the quality end, the experience, the knowledge, the skilled end of engineering, aren't they? Precision engineering.
Look at COVID. We had the ventilator challenge. Everybody forgot about the competitiveness, got together in the scrum, pushed hard, and got it over the line. And that was an amazing achievement. We have the capability to do this reactive, innovative engineering. What we need to do now is to turn that into long-term, sustainable, profitable business.
There are some of the things that we talk about government support, but there are things with recently. Well, the government obviously does the 4.5 billion in funding for British manufacturing to increase the investment in 8 sectors from 2025 for 5 years. This is on some of the notes I'm reading from you, Lee. 4.5 billion for strategic manufacturing sectors, including 960 million earmarked for clean energy. Funding will be delivered to 8 sectors key to the economic growth, energy security and levelling up. Part of the wider government support is to ensure the UK is the best place to start, grow and invest in manufacturing. That's a bold statement, isn't it? And money and funding isn't everything. There's got to be something else behind it. But there's some good numbers there, and there's some good things in place that, when you buy a machine, you can offset it against your tax and all the rest of it. There is some support there that must help.
This is all really good. This is all really good, really positive incentives for UK government, from UK government to industry. Sorry. So there's the 4.5 billion you just mentioned. There's the full expensing strategy that was rolled out last year, or an extension of rolled out last year for purchase of capital equipment that's now been rolled out into lease this year, where those values can be taken from the tax owed by the manufacturers to incentivise investments in plant and equipment. These are all fantastic, but, and again I hate to use the word but companies only need the equipment when they've won the contracts. They've got to be competitive to win the contracts. The contracts have got to be driven into the UK, or they'll be placed in other countries where they're placed today. You're only going to move something if there's an advantage or a reason to move it. So a reason to move it would be an offset type strategy, a reciprocal trade agreement. And another reason to use it is obviously the commercial gain. The commercial gain will only come if the supply chain is engaged with very closely by the OEMs to encourage it to hit those price targets and to invest in the relevant equipment that's going to enable them to hit it. And that will only happen if the government are pushing the business down the food chain.
So I guess if I was to ask you the question, if you take two sides, if you take the numbers and the monetary aspect that we talk about there and the investment from the government compared to them responding in a different manner and setting up some of these offset strategies like with Boeing that we talked about, which of those two do you think is more important and likely to lead to a better outcome?
I think they're both as important as each other's. One kind of drives the other. I think the offset agreement's the critical first step to force the business opportunity into the UK. If the opportunity then shows that we're not competitive, we then need a mechanism in the UK to make us more competitive. So we're kind of in a vicious circle right now. So we'll only win contracts if we're competitive. We're not competitive because we've not invested in the right equipment because the previous contracts are too short. So we can't take the full advantage of the government incentives that are there to encourage the buying. So then we go and we buy a cheaper product because we've not got the long-term commitment, which means we're less competitive, which means we're either going to lose it or we're going to make it at a lower margin. However, if the government secured the business for the UK or the business opportunity in the first place, and then the OEMs worked with the supply chain to encourage them to be more competitive and to invest in equipment to make them more competitive, then it's a win-win. And this could be done at the flick of a switch.
It seems to me that we simplify it and we make it sound simple, but it doesn't sound that complicated to do. It sounds like it needs someone with care and attention and the want to make this happen, really, in my mind.
Well, I hope if anybody's listened to this discussion and if they agree or disagree, then they'll make contact. And the more people that are behind this, there are associations out there that will work with us to push this forwards and to engage with government. If government listens and sees this as an opportunity, then maybe something will happen. But I think if we carry on doing what we're doing, you'll be posting great stories, and they are great stories, about great facilities to assemble lots of products that are made outside the UK. What I'd like to do is see in 5 years' time these assembly facilities assembling products that are made inside the UK that are reshored.
And that is a brilliant way to end this podcast, Lee. It's been a really, hopefully, engaging listen and watch for our viewers. And if there are those out there that feel strongly about this industry like we do, please do get in contact with us. Please do comment and tell us your thoughts. I mean, are we right or are we wrong in what we're saying? I would really be encouraged to hear from others as to what their opinions are, as to certainly some of the points Lee touches on about things being assembled here and a lot of it not being made. Is that right? And how can we improve it over and above the possible solutions that Lee has mentioned. Thank you very much for joining me today, Lee. It's been very engaging and uplifting to talk about some of the good things in manufacturing, but let's just hope some of these aspects do get solved as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the MTDCNC podcast, sponsored by Langley Alloys, specialists in a wide range of exotic materials for any application for all your engineering needs.